Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this special episode of the OTTRED Spotlight Podcast. The reason that I'm so excited about this episode is because we're going to shine a torch on a totally different dimension of what the sector that we always speak about is actually all about. Recently, I've been speaking a lot about gaming, OTT, and music. Today, we've got Josh Busteed, who's the Chief Commercial Officer of ARN, in the studio with us. And we're going to be getting into the nuts and bolts and granularity of the business side of actually a really well-established part of digital entertainment and something that's caught up with the technological side dramatically fast. The data side of what's captured and utilized is equally as fast as streaming, and some of the numbers associated to the balance sheets are super impressive in comparison to some of the well-known streaming organizations that we all know and love. Josh, welcome to the OTTRED Spotlight Podcast.
Thanks for having me. I wouldn't mind meeting that guy as well.
That's you, buddy. That's you. Look, I am really looking forward to this because I speak within my global community a lot. Typically, 80% of what we speak about is about streaming. Gaming is becoming a more prominent feature, but more and more, we've been speaking about music as well. And the question that I'm dying to start off with in this interview is, if radio was invented now, what would be the commercial model behind it?
Yeah, it's a cracking question. Unfortunately, I think the decision that would be made now would be at the detriment of radio. I think if you turn back, and I'm showing my age to a lot of people watching this podcast, but when radio really first started, under his master's voice in post-World War II, it came with advertisers. The serials, the things that happened came with advertisers. It was inbuilt. So I think people progressively over a period of time have now built a relationship expecting ads with radio. That was the promise that came, and everyone's learned to accept it, obviously within time limits and everything else that goes with it. But I think if someone put a business model up today to say, we're going to do a breakfast show, we're doing this, we're going to produce the best content, we're going to run the hottest tracks, we're going to do this, but let's do it without advertisers and let's do a subscriber model. I think that's what would happen. Yeah. And unfortunately, I'm fairly confident that just wouldn't work.
Yeah. Well, I know when we spoke before, you spoke about the moment when Apple were talking about going to market with some type of radio proposition. Talk us through that, Josh, because it's not only an interesting anecdote, but your perspective on what it actually suggests is really interesting as well.
Yeah, I want to say 2007, 2008, I was working at Nova Entertainment in Sydney, Australia, and we were the coolest, hippest radio network in the country. Even back then, I was the old dude in the office. And we got word from a really reliable source that Apple globally, on the back of Apple Music, was going to launch live breakfast shows in hundreds of markets around the world. And it stopped me dead in my tracks, because for me, that then meant the merge of a connected device, millions of users, unlimited marketing budgets, and the one thing that I think radio dramatically wins on, which is local, engaging content in my market. Thankfully, whoever made the decision not to is, in my opinion, kept radio alive, because they ended up going with one show in London that was going to serve the world. And, here we are, 15 years later, and no one can even remember the name of that show because it was never going to work. But I remember thinking at that time, this could be absolutely a huge challenge for us.
Yeah, absolutely. You came to Dubai in 2012. You were headhunted to go and lead the sales function at ARN.
Yeah.
How much have you seen? Dubai is pretty unique anyway in terms of its characteristics. We'll get into that in a second. But how much have you seen in the time that you've been at ARN, the nature of radio and the nature of how revenue is generated, the blend I'm alluding to, kind of change and evolve?
Yeah, I think with all places, I think over time things change, but it's been pretty dramatic here. When I first arrived in 2012, 80% of our business came via media agencies. And to put that into perspective, globally, the average would be 50-50 for most audio businesses, given the nature of local regional broadcasters or in large places like the UK or the US or whatever. So I was a bit taken aback by that. And with respect to my good friends in media agencies, they ran the town and they made the decisions on how this was going to look. So unpopularly, I set about making a change to that and beefing up our resources and servicing the needs of both ends of the customer pipeline, and wind the clock forward 13 years later, and we're a very different business. Probably 50-55% of our business is direct now, which is what it should be. When you're running, in essence, we're probably doing 550, 600 advertisers every month, 12 months of the year. To get those 600 advertisers, you probably need to be having conversations with 5,000. We're seeing a lot of people, and to do that, we need to be able to have the resources, the human capital to be able to have those conversations, but we need to be able to have the reach. And ultimately, I think most people, with respect to media agencies, advertising for me is a really simple business. I always refer to us as the world's largest dating agency. We are introducing brands and audience. That's what we do. We introduce those two, and then with how they choose to do thereafter is up to them. But all we need to make sure that we're doing is making sure that we're producing the best opportunity for those advertisers to engage with our audience. And if we do it regularly, frequently, smartly, creatively, then it works. And when it works, the advertiser will come back. It's when we're not putting men on the moon or, curing cancer. It's a pretty simple, through all the words and all the great marketing and advertising speak, that's the reality. And, I always say when we have the great pleasure of sitting in front of great brands, and everyone wants to talk about synergistic returns and, and using lovely language around. At the end of the day, what brands want is they want to sell more things. That's what they want to do. And our job, in its simplest term, is to help them. And if we help them to sell things, they'll keep buying more advertising off us. If we don't, they'll find someone else.
Yeah, absolutely. Josh, when someone asks you at a social event what you do, when you meet someone for the first time, how do you describe what you do?
I said, I do the thing that you like least on your radio station.
That's what I was alluding to, actually. Do you talk about being in radio or advertising?
Yeah, no, I'm in advertising. Radio's been a huge part of my life. It's not where I started. I started, I'm a sports fanatic, and, did a half-baked degree in sports marketing, and then spent 5 or 6 years with Tennis Australia, and then I worked at SOCOG, Sydney Olympic, organising games for those people old enough to remember there was Olympics back then. And then I worked for IMG, which is at the time was the world's biggest sports marketing agency. And I fell into radio in 2005, I think, 2004. And I loved everything about it. And what I loved about it, and one of my first bosses said to me, the beauty of this industry, it's the good, the bad, and the ugly all in one day. And he was right. We are a 365, 24/7 industry that is fundamentally underpinned by commerciality. That's the reality. We don't charge people to use for it. We don't, ARN here, we don't market to you through social or WhatsApp or email. We use social as an extension of our on-air audience. So we have one stream of income, and it's advertisers. And if you make those advertisers work, it's really profitable.
I've met you a few times now, Josh, and whenever you talk about what you do, you can still feel that ignition moment. You've still got a passion for what you do. It's like you're at sea level. You're responsible for a large budget for a service that touches half the population every day of the country that we live in, and it still ignites you.
Yeah, and I think, it's weird, isn't it? I mean, I think my wife describes me as, as a two-speed animal. It's either 100% or asleep. And yeah, I guess I am a little bit like that. But what makes, I need to be passionate about what I do. there's a number of things in my life that I need to do to be passionate about. You know, as I said, I'm passionate about sports, so I still invest what little spare time I have in coaching rugby because it makes me feel good,
right?
And I have a passion for it. And if you speak to the boys that I coach rugby, they would say the same thing that you just said. It looks like it's the only thing that matters. Unfortunately, I ain't that good, so I can't get paid for it. So I have to actually do a job. But I just do things that matter to me, you know, and I think I'm even the same way with friends, you know, without getting, you know, Dave Goggins on you. The reality is that I surround myself with people who, make me feel good, but are passionate about what they do, because I think that rubs off on you. And I think if you surround yourself with negativity, you become negative.
Well, you're a sales leader as well, right? And I think that you do emanate that kind of positive aura when you're around, you know, you're effervescent to talk to, you're passionate about what you talk about. Do you think that's part of the signature of your leadership style as well?
Yeah, I think so. I think people would describe me, you know, and I have this sort of, again, probably showing my age, but I have this sort of long-held belief that I'll never ask you to do something that I don't do. And to be super honest with you, whilst the actual part of the job that I love the most, which is sitting in front of clients and coming up with great ideas, I get to spend the least amount of time now than I ever have in my career. When I do get that opportunity, it's what ignites me. And, you know, I have to now channel that same level of thinking and that same level of passion into, you know, less exciting ventures like boards and shareholders and whatever else. But I still approach them in the same way. And, you know, Mahmoud, who's the general manager in our business, Emirati, been in our business since 2002, he literally is so attuned to how I am that if I'm not at 100%, he pulls me aside and says, "Is everything okay? Is your family okay?" And I'm like, "Yeah, why?" And he goes, "Because you're not there." And, you know, so I think you have to be. I mean, I think really at the end of the day, people fall into two categories. I think people either want to follow or want to be led, and I don't think it's a conscious thing necessarily. I think some people just go through life, and I think I've always liked to lead. I always like to get people to do things that they thought they couldn't do before. And to do that, I think you have to get that person to believe that you're prepared to do it as well. You know, I think the world's full of people who sit behind desks and tell people to go do stuff. But if they believe that you're prepared to go first over the trench, then people will buy into that.
You mentioned that you love being with clients. I can imagine what you're like in a client meeting, Josh. Talk to me a little bit about the business side of, at the next level of detail, around how an advertising business that uses the format of radio and the complexion of propositions, media propositions that we're talking about, how does it actually work in terms of, you know, 50% of your business is now direct. How much of the creative element of that is actually done? And I'm going somewhere with this as well around the fast proposition on the streaming side now, which is obviously the kind of ads side of things. But
yeah, look, I think, you know, probably of that 50%, 90% of the idea, the execution and the creativity is built out of our business. Even a reasonable portion of the agency business, certainly the idea, the execution is us, sometimes not the creative, but including sometimes the creative. And I think I'm of the belief that there should be no one better than the owner of the media to be able to develop an idea for the media. We should know our audience better. We should know, you know, in our case, the 9 stations we have, the 7 languages we have. I should be able to, and my team should be able to sit with a client and talk through the vagaries of each language, each nationality, how they resonate, how that differs. And, you know, the world of when I first got here, it was, you know, build an ad in English and then translate it. You know, that is a dismal failure, aside from the fact that most of the time it actually doesn't translate anyway. But I think, you know, we're really focused on building campaigns for clients, for languages and for nationality groups here through that execution. Is it resource heavy? Yeah. Is it profitable if done well? Absolutely. And I think the challenge and it's the challenge for all media businesses, is if you don't believe that your audience is rich and deep enough to drive ad revenue, then you're in the wrong business, because that is at the precipice of any successful media business over the last 100 years has been a couple of things. It's been a deep audience, has been a rich audience, rich by depth, not rich by cash, and an ability for advertisers to be able to work within the framework to get to those. And I think a lot of the time, I'll use my favorite example all the time is always, our good friends in newspapers, and, they had the best business in the world. They were you pay $1 for your newspaper. Advertisers from page 1 to page 100. You had a phone book in the middle of classifieds. You had a phone book in the middle of houses for sale and rent and you wind the clock forward to 2024 and virtually none of that business exists now, but there are multiple companies outside of those publishers now providing those services.
You know what fascinates me when you talk about something like that, where there was such a clear business model, and I know how passionate you are about clear business models.
Yes.
Clear business model, profitable businesses that lasted for decades. If you look at the bottom line contribution of a lot of the entirely digital organizations now, they're struggling. The bottom lines are fairly anemic in many of those instances, if not non-existent. What's your view on subscription-based services, Josh?
Yeah, I think it's the great million challenge. I think any new business needs to start from a position of understanding we will need to generate external revenue to make this work. No matter how big, how wide we can get the reach, no matter how many countries we can get the reach. And I think sometimes, I think social has been a really good example of how it tricks us. Most advertisers, 90 to 95% of all advertisers at best want their country. In reality, probably want the county or the state or in the city. So whether, XYZ digital platform has 1 trillion of this or 8 trillion of that, it's an irrelevant conversation. There's a very small number of advertisers, excuse me, who have globally integrated campaign spends. Very few. It's a tiny portion. So what actually matters to Josh and Chris's restaurant chain in Dubai is Dubai. And so our decisions around where we spend, how we spend is relative to Dubai. How big that ecosystem is beyond Dubai is an irrelevant conversation. So I think if you start from the position of we need to be able to generate a return on a city by city, state by state, county by county, country by country basis, then you can build a model that couples that. And I don't think that can be built by subscription alone. I think you need to have advertising at the heart of what you do from the get-go.
Do you think the magnetic north of subscription-based business models is more towards a Wall Street mentality than a bottom line generation mentality?
Yeah, and I think it's everyone wants to IPO. And good luck to them, man. If someone gave me the opportunity, I'd want the same thing. I don't begrudge anyone about, building a great business with trillions of users around the world and cashing their chips and going and leading a very nice life. I tip my hat to them, but I don't think it's a long-term business, because if I was one of those Wall Street investors, at some point you better tell me how I'm getting my cash back.
Well, that's the moment where we're kind of in, isn't it? You've got all this investment that was poured into streaming, accentuated post-COVID by the massive amount of take-up that there was. And now we're at that kind of plateau moment where subscriber conquesting is the mood music of the moment.
Absolutely.
And they're not trying to win incremental subscribers anymore. It's trying to nick subscribers off each other.
Yeah. And I think, that's, again, not new to media. I think that's, how do we make a big pie smaller? And I think media is very good at it, all medias, if you look at linear, if you look even back to publishing, you look at audio, we're all very good at, taking 100 million and turning it into 60 over 5 years, fighting for it, when in reality, I see our job as turning the 100 into 200, and that's by doing the 100 better than we've ever done before. So I think, and people watching this podcast might think, well, he's a chief commercial officer. Of course he's going to think that way, but there's a reason I have this job. And the reason I have this job is because if we don't make money, we don't pay presenters. We don't produce great quality. We don't have 9 state-of-the-art studios in the heart of Media City broadcasting to 4 million people a week. Yeah. That's what works, not one over the other. And, I think I mentioned to you the other time when we were talking, I go to conferences and asked to speak in places around the world. And every conference I go to, it's always about content. Content is king, content is king, content is king, content is king. And I think content is super important. I really do, Our business has great presenters, we have great music people, we have great content directors, but platform is king. It absolutely is king. Content's maybe queen, maybe even princess, but platform is king. If you have, back to that, conversation around city, county, state, if you have that reach in that town and, you're doing what we're doing, which is 4 million people a week, you will make a lot of money. You will make money.
That penetration's huge.
You're still in the US, you're still talking, radio still has, in the US, 94% penetration. People just don't talk about it. People want to go, well, social has this and digital has this and da-da. They're just not in the hemisphere because regardless of wealth or how poor or how rich you may be, regardless of the demographics of your city, regardless of the language, it's there and it's free. And to get my free service, I'm going to have to listen to some ads along the way. And as long as the guys in Josh's team do a half decent job, I'll put up with them.
Do you look at it's obviously more evolved in North America as a market than it is in, let's say, Europe or some other places, but FAST as a proposition, in the kind of TV side of things.
Yeah.
Do you think there are some comparisons there or some cross-pollination of lessons from your experience in radio to what, FAST TV could achieve?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think they're widely dissimilar businesses. I think there's a lot of similarities. I mean, if I look at, and probably maybe one of my great failings, but I always use myself and my family as a case study whenever I'm talking to someone, because I think if you can convince me and convince my family of something, then you've probably got a pretty reasonable audience. If I think it's crazy and my family thinks it's crazy, then maybe it's crazy. But if I look at my consumption, from a TV perspective, obviously we live here. I don't watch linear TV here. There's nothing that interests me here. I'm not Arab speaking, so that rules out NBC and Shahid and everyone else. But I have a connected TV and I have 1,000 apps, sitting on that. To be honest, that I pay for 10 of them, and of those 10, I'm not sure what I'm getting. I'm really not. But when I find great content, I'm in, and I would happily take an ad at the front, an ad in the middle, and an ad at the end to get that, because they're great. They're fantastic. If I may be giving away a few secrets about my habits, but I'm an autobiography reader. I'm a autobiography watcher. If it's a story about someone, I'm in, and no matter what the backdrop, no matter what the story, I'm in, from rock stars to sports stars to scientists to villains to narco dealers, you name it, I'm in. And if you find it, I'll sit there and I'll watch 10 episodes. And if you want to serve me 20 ads while I'm watching those 10 episodes, absolutely. But sometimes I look at those apps and I think to myself, I haven't found anything that I want to watch on any of those apps in, the last 10 times I've visited.
Yeah, the subscription apps.
What am I paying for? And I think, like all things, they have the reach. If you look at a company like Netflix, or you look at Amazon Prime, or you look at, some of the global brands in that space, they have great content, but they have a huge challenge because they're supposed to be serving, 7 billion people with content that keeps 7 billion people happy. And I don't know about you, but I can't even get something that the whole family would like to watch, let alone 7 billion people all happy with. So in terms of the cost of producing that content, that's incredibly difficult, and I think they have a huge challenge if it's a subscriber-only model. And I think a market-driven advertising model in combination with subscription, depending on the content that was being produced in that market, I think is the way to go. And I think we'd take it.
There's another interesting dimension to it, isn't there, Josh, that I've just thought of, which is that when you're chasing the unit value of subscribers, the amount that they pay is going to be relatively static. Even, you get more of them, you get X times that amount. Yeah. But I guess when you've got an advertising-based commercial model, the higher the equity in terms of the perception of the brand and the more people listening, the more you can charge for that space.
Absolutely.
So the EBIT potential is exponential.
Absolutely. And I think that, again, if you look at linear TV as the great living example, and, I was, Tom Urquhart from Dubai, I was telling me this great story that he watched a podcast about the first Apple Super Bowl ad, which was the take on Orson Welles' 1984. And when they first launched the Mac. And, it's a very famous commercial, and it was very revolutionary. It didn't even show the computer. It was about Apple breaking through all this sort of old manness and geekiness of computers and making it for all of us in an Orson Welles kind of way. Anyway, the guys produced it. Steve Jobs loved it. Steve Jobs went to the board. The board hated everything and canned it. They'd already bought 10 slots on the Super Bowl. Now, if anyone involved in the ad industry, that's on the even today on the globe, that's the number one highest ticket item in advertising, and they'd bought 10 slots. They said dump them, so they could only get rid of 9, and they were left with 1. And the marketing guys came to Steve Jobs and said, "We just can't get rid of this last one. What do you want us to do?" And he said, "Run it." And, today we're talking 30 years later, they're saying that ad changed not only everything about advertising, but changed everything for that business. So I think done well, done the right way, done in the right format with the right audience reach, can have dramatic impact on a client's business. Dramatic. And today, 30 years on, linear TV, Super Bowl is still generating the highest ticket price on the globe on a per spot basis. So, I think I just honestly, without being the commercial guy in the room and wanting to bang the drum, I just don't think advertising is the antithesis or the evil of media. I think it's what drives it. I think it's what makes it.
Well, we're seeing the pendulum swing from the streaming subscription model more towards FAST. And FAST is a more modern version of the kind of linear model, isn't it? Josh, what some of the numbers that fluidly fall off your tongue when you're talking about the complexion of the market here in the UAE are staggering to me. We talked about penetration before. We talked about the number of languages, the number of radio stations that you've got. Do you think that the opportunity created by that diversity, complexity, and relatively small geographic space gives you a proportionate advantage when it comes to how profitable you can drive ARN?
Yeah, look, I think, and I've said it before, I've said it publicly before, I think this is the best audio market in the world, only because of its diversity. And, as I said, we have 9 stations serving 7 languages, so we can reach people in the language of their choice, with the entertainment of their choice, with the information of their choice, with the music of their choice. However, it makes a unique challenge, because the unique challenge is, if we were in London or we were in Sydney or in New York, we'd be running in English, and we would be competing on type of music, format, talk versus music, entertainment, shock jock. We'd be fighting for segments. So one of our challenges is, if we run a Desi station, our Indian station, we run a Malayalam station, our South Indian station, or we have a Filipino station, we're supposedly meant to be serving 12 to 100 in terms of demo, which is tough. You know, not everyone likes the same things and whatever else. So yes, the language part wins, but it's still a tough business because you need to serve a very different psychographic and age demographic, and it's challenging. But you know, if you were in any capital city in the world or any reasonable sized market in the world, and you said you're doing 50% of the population a week in terms of reach, you have a great business. You know, you have a great business. And if you can't effectively produce outstanding commercial returns to drive EBIT or profit off that, then you need to look at who's doing it for you, because this is a great town.
I want to turn the conversation a little bit, if you don't mind, Josh, because in-car entertainment is obviously a large part of where people listen to radio. And Felix Volter, the head of automotive from 3SS, was on here on the podcast a couple of months ago talking about the automotive sector and how with autonomous driving and stuff like that becoming closer and closer to being a reality and dramatically enhanced levels of in-car entertainment anyway. What's your view of that? Because I'd imagine that's a big audience for you. When I get in the car, the radio just comes on. As long as I'm not offended in any way by what's on, you know, crappy song or whatever, that's what's going to stay on.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, that's in the classics, that's messing in our playground. And, you know, to be honest, we embrace that as a business. Unlike potentially some other people in other places, we see that as an opportunity to do better and to be better as part of that space, as opposed to seeing that as, oh my God, the end is near. And, you know, again, without showing my age, there was a song in 1988 called Music Killed the Radio Star, you know, and since 1988, radio is supposed to have been killed first by MTV, then by Steve, killed it with the iPod, then he put it in a phone, and then it hasn't. And in that period, if you look at any major capital city on the planet, radio's reach has actually grown in that same incremental period. And if you're running a great audio business, so's your revenue. And those things, I think, have been incrementally beneficial to our business, because the more people talking about audio or taking in music or taking in content in an audio is great for the audio business. And we're just one part of, a big part, but one part of. So, you know, I think the car itself has been our domain, you know, from his master's voice all the way through has been our domain. We've owned that space. And, you know, to be fair, you know, people talk about talent. The reality is you've had the ability to be able to get us off and to do something if you want for probably a good 10 years now, you know, from a wireless perspective. And then, you know, most modern cars, particularly in a city like Dubai, most modern cars, you have the ability to apps on screen and whatever else. So I think connected cars here, I think what it looks like is into the future. I was at a conference probably less than 12 months ago, and I think his title was Head of Car Integration at Audi Group. And he was talking about, and, you know, this was an audio conference, predominantly people from all around the world, but predominantly radio groups, podcasters, you know, audio professionals from around the world. We were in Prague. Nice city, by the way, very nice city. And he was talking about what it is that they were doing. And, you know, he was saying and mentioned other manufacturers doing the same thing. They wanted to own the in-car experience, and they used Apple as their benchmark of why that was. And, you know, he really fascinated me, this guy. I was, you know, probably one of the few sessions I was super engaged in. And he basically was saying that they saw the in-car experience, yes, as a customer experience, but one was a data experience. And he felt, and I presume his views were shared widely within organizations, that they were giving free kicks to Google and others by allowing the integration of maps or allowing the integration of Safari or whatever it might be within that environment. And they wanted to own that. And they didn't want third parties to be able to do, you know, to be able to take that data. They wanted to own it. Audi, yeah, and the Audi group and all the brands that sit inside it. And I was like, man, that makes absolute sense. I honestly had never entered my head. I was like, wow, that's like a turn the light on moment for me. And, he then went on to say that, they saw it as a journey for the customer once you were in one. Again, not dissimilar to the Apple. You buy an iPhone, then you get yourself an iPod, then you have a Mac, then you have an iPad, and all of a sudden everyone in your family's got one. And before long, I can't not be an Apple customer because everything's on there and everything's on all my devices and it's too hard to change. And he saw the car the same way, that, you type your name into, if you're an Audi driver and you type your name in, the seat moves to your favorite position, the radio goes to your favorite station, it's at your climate control, all your destinations you've ever traveled to using your Audi is stored in there. So, Chris's house, bang, off we go. And he's then, from a customer experience, wow, amazing. But then also from a data experience in terms of what content that they know our own. I mean, other than the office is probably the place I spend the second most amount of time in, and all the things that I do and all the places that I go and all the things that I'm doing in the car are now owned by the manufacturer, that I'm sure they'll find a way for us to sign it when we're purchasing the car.
On the point of data and digital ecosystems, I think we've talked about this before. Samsung, really interesting, rapidly kind of ambitious around catching up with what you've just described with Apple. Has the digital revolution, and over the last 5 years, everything's cloud, everything's virtual, everything's about data, and advertising, particularly in an IP-based environment, been more about data. Has that made it more complicated to sell ads or less?
Yeah, great. Super question. Yes and no. I think the reality is, without being too controversial, in an IP world, I don't think the person selling the ads can be the judge and the jury as well. So I have great difficulty with data being provided by the platform itself as an example of the success of the campaign or the measurement or the reach. And that's a fundamental principle. And again, I'm showing my age, that linear TV or audio or even newspaper or magazine or whatever else was third-party audience measurement. So I'm a huge believer in third-party data and third-party measurement. Does that make it harder? Yeah, because then you have the combination of, in our business, you have the combination of FM, digital, all forms of digital, and being able to split out the audience. So it's not a perfect science by any stretch. But I certainly don't believe that data provided solely and wholly by the platform itself can possibly be seen in all cases as of equal value to that provided by a third party whose job it is to produce that on behalf of the industry. So does a Nelson or a GFK or any of those people, are they perfect? No, they're certainly not perfect. But I think it gives a level of comfortability to an advertiser about the audience, the age, the sex, the demos, all of those things, for them to be able to make informed decision together with the integrated concept to deliver that outcome. In the absence of any data, we live in, a world of perceptions. And, to be super honest, this part of the world has been dragging in a world of self-perception for some period of time. I think we need to do a much better job in this space. We, for a long period of time, have been paying on our own with no support from anyone else in the industry, Nelson, to produce third-party data on behalf of the entire industry. Not 1 cent from any of our competitor set, because we believe, to your point, that in a world of IP addresses and other forms of immediate data, that we at least need to be at baseline in terms of giving audiences a level of comfort around what it is that they're actually getting, what an advertiser's seeing, and being able to make those informed decisions. So do I think we compete with digital dollars? No, I don't. I really don't. I think, do we extend what we do in a digital environment? Absolutely. I would say 75, 80% of all of our campaigns now are extended on social, extended on web, extended on app. We run an ARN Play, which is all of our brands inside one app. So I think, yes, we do, but I don't see, you're not going to choose between ARN and an Instagram campaign or a TikTok campaign or a Facebook campaign, or probably, to be honest, even a Spotify campaign. I think they're different budgets. I think they're different piles of cash. Do I think that we have to fight harder than we did 20 years ago? Yeah. Do I think we have to fight harder than we did 10? No. I think people are in, there's a lot of examples. I think we all went through a period where we believed that digital was everything. It was the answer for everything that ailed you, both as a consumer and an advertiser. I think there's been a circle back on reality of, my favorite line is, where the audience lives is where I want to be. And if your audience is there, it doesn't matter how big it is, but it's about the effectiveness of drilling down. If I'm after 100, if I'm after, I always say this to people, it sounds a bit dumb and a bit cliche, but I just think it's so true. I said, no advertiser has ever walked into a room and said, I need 4 million people to go to my restaurant, or 4 million people to go to my car dealership, or 4 million people to go to the hotel. They talk in the tens, maybe the hundreds, At worst, they talk in the thousands, right? So if a customer talks like that, why are we talking about 4 millions or 10 million or 100 million global? We need to be talking their language, which is, you need 100 people to get to Chris and Josh's restaurant on Thursday nights because no one's going on Thursday night. That's my job. You need... I always use the example to people in this market. If there's an event in this country, from concerts to sporting events to anything that's happening large in this country, the first name you will ever hear is ARN. We are the first one to do it. And that's the reason is because we talk to people about the city we're in. You want to buy tickets to the concert, this is the first place you're going to hear it. You want to, win tickets to this concert, this is the first place that you're going to hear about it. That's where I think business of media needs to reframe its conversation. And I think investment bankers, Wall Street and IPOs has convinced us all that it's a race to the end with the most. And I'm old school. I think it's a race to the end with the most in the bank, not with the most number of people.
What you're saying reminds me of a conversation that I had yesterday with the CEO of an OTT platform. And I asked him, when someone approaches you and they want to establish a streaming channel, who are the most successful across all of your years of experience? And he said, Chris, they're the ones that niche down and really know their market, because they can get the mood music, they can get the texture of what they're choosing to put across that service so right that people just want to stay there. Spiritually, that's where they want to go to. And that's what Dubai is for ARN, right? You guys know your market.
Yeah, and I think that's spot on. I think that's a perfect analogy of it. I think, and again, through the investment banking IPO Wall Street model, you think a decision made in San Francisco or London or New York or Tokyo or Sydney can possibly give the mood and the feeling of someone in Minnesota or Cowra, Australia, or, anywhere. It's not possible. But if you're in that town, you're in that city, you're in that country, you're in that part of the world, you can reflect what is going on around them, and reflecting what gets you audience. And once you have audience, you have advertisers. And I think that's a great analogy, and one that I think maybe some of our friends in pinstripe suits have sort of lost along the way.
I've got 2 more questions for you, Josh. I feel like we could probably kill most of the evening talking about all of this stuff. But here's the first one. Radio and the way you talk about it is so effervescent and convincing. I'm sitting here listening to you, inspired about the format. It's been through decades and decades of challenges, up and coming, different technologies, different formats, different devices. At this stage, what do you think the biggest threat to the format of radio is? Is there even one?
Yeah, look, absolutely. I mean, I think its single greatest threat is itself. I think without, again, I'm known to be slightly controversial, but when I go around the world and listen to people speak about audio, I think we are, certainly radio, part of audio, we are a naturally defensive industry that sort of feels like we're We need to defend ourselves all the time. When you look at any of the data in terms of reach, in terms of outcome, in terms of audience, we are reaching considerably more people than any form of digital media, and then some. If you look at the profitability of many of those businesses, the same thing can be said. But we don't talk in that language. I think we're a bit like the old man in the corner talking about the good old days, when in reality I think we're in the good days. If I look at our business, we're more profitable in 2024 than we've ever been in the 25 years of our business. So we are an example of the good days. And I certainly are connected with a number of people around the globe in other audio businesses, and they're the same. And I think I don't see streaming services as competition. I don't see podcasts as competition. I don't see Chris's personal music collection as competition, because I don't think we do the same things, and I don't think we serve you in the same way. But I think if we don't get our heads right on a global basis, we always talk in our business that there's two guys in a garage now trying to work out how to kill us. Yeah. We always talk about it. And we always have to ask ourselves, if we were those two guys, what is it that we'd be doing? And I think that's a good way to look at it, because I just don't think radio globally looks at itself that way.
Yeah. Final question, mate. A little bit off-piste, but I love this one. If you could give the younger you a bit of advice, what would it be?
Great question, man. Some of it I can say on here, and some of it I probably can't. No, look, I think I took a long time to be comfortable with who I am. I think, I grew up, I'll say it out loud, I'm 50 years old. I grew up in an era where, my parents were boomers. They were great people. I love everything about them. They did everything they could for me, but they never told me anything. They never talked to me about anything. I don't think I had an honest conversation with my parents until I was like 30. And because of that, I think I spent a long part of my 20s and 30s trying to work out who I was. And to be honest with you, if you ask my wife, she'll tell me at probably 40, I really worked out who I am. And I'm okay with who I am. I like who I am. And I'm an acquired taste. What you're seeing now is me everywhere. Socially, I don't change for people. I don't put on a different show. I'm not for characters. This is what I'm like. All through my social life, my friends, through coaching rugby, at work, this is exactly how I am. And I'm an acquired taste, and it's okay, and I don't have to worry about that anymore. But it took me a long time to get there. So I think to answer your question is what I try to do with my kids, and I want it to be different than that experience that I had. And to be fair, I'm not, it's not a sad story. I think it's most people of my age had exactly the same experience. So I've always had honest conversations with my kids. I've talked to my kids about my mistakes, my failings, and my wife and I have talked about our relationship with our kids and, what's important. And so, my kids, three of my kids are living back home at university, and, we would speak 4 times a week. When I was 21 years old, I think I spoke to my mum once a month, and we lived, an hour away, because they trust me, because I've been honest with them, and they like me for who I am, and they'll know that I won't necessarily say what it is they want to hear, but maybe what it is they need to hear. And it takes you a long time to get to that point, but I wish I could go back now and talk to the 22-year-old Josh and say, it's okay to be you, it's okay to think the way that you think and operate the way that you are. And it's also okay for people not to like you, I'm not massive on social. I have all the socials. I don't post a lot. I haven't posted on Instagram since 2017. I spend a lot of time there watching our talent and watching other people on it, because I just don't care. I honestly don't care anymore what people think or don't think, or it's just not important to me. What matters is, do I get to Friday night, end of the week, and go, did I give it a red hot shot this week? Am I comfortable with who I am? Does my family love me? And if the answer to all of those is yes, job done. You know, how many likes I got, or how many follows I got, or who liked Josh's workout of the day picture, and what I just don't think it's important, and again, maybe showing my age a little bit on your podcast, Chris, but that's what I'd have the conversation with myself.
Well, a great way to wrap up on a red hot shot.
Yeah.
Josh, thank you for coming on. I knew having you on for this conversation would be compelling, insightful, contentious, to coin the term that you've used a few times, but I really believe that people watching this on LinkedIn Live or the YouTube channel, or maybe listening to it on Spotify, will feel at this stage as though they've had some real thought-provoking content provided to them from the value of your experiences. So, Josh, from me to you, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me. I really enjoyed it. Thanks, Chris.
Thanks, buddy.